The first bullet struck the side of the train 3 inches from Natalie Reed's face. Metal screamed. Glass exploded inward. And before she could throw herself down, a man dressed in black crossed the narrow space between them and covered her body with his own. Marco Bellini did not shout. He did not flinch. He simply locked one arm around Natalie's waist, turned his broad back toward the open doorway, and took the storm of shattered glass across his coat as gunfire flashed from the white darkness outside. "Stay behind me," he said. His voice was so calm that for one impossible second, Natalie forgot they were trapped halfway up the Rockies, surrounded by armed men, with a destroyed bridge ahead and a 1,000-foot drop behind them. Then another bullet tore through the doorway. Marco pushed her against the wall of the conductor's cabin and lifted his handgun. Snow blew in around him, silver beneath the emergency lights. Blood ran from a cut above his eyebrow. His black coat snapped violently in the wind. He looked less like a passenger and more like something the mountain itself had released. A predator dressed as a man. "Marco," Natalie breathed. He fired, twice into the storm. A dark figure fell beside the tracks. Marco glanced back at her, his expression controlled, almost cold, but his hand tightened around her hip, as if confirming she was still there. "They came for me," he said. From somewhere beneath the train came the heavy metallic clank of someone attaching explosives to the undercarriage. Marco's eyes sharpened. "But they will have to go through me to reach you." 3 hours earlier, everyone had laughed when Natalie Reed stopped his train. At 11:47 p.m., the Bellini Limited appeared on the eastern track like a blade cutting through the night. It was not listed on any public schedule. Private trains rarely were. The locomotive was black, polished to a mirror shine, with silver trim along its body and darkened passenger windows that gave away nothing about who traveled inside. 2 luxury carriages followed behind it, each rumored to contain more security than most courthouses. Every railway employee in western Colorado knew the name painted discreetly beneath the first carriage window: Bellini. The Bellini family owned hotels, construction firms, shipping terminals, private security companies, and enough politicians to make their enemies careful. They also controlled a criminal empire, stretching from New York to California. And Marco Bellini was the man at its center. He was 38, unmarried, rarely photographed, and feared by people who had never even met him. The stories about Marco varied depending on who told them. Some said he once closed an entire port because a customs officer delayed one of his ships. Others claimed he had made a rival disappear during a charity gala without leaving his table. Natalie did not know which stories were true. She only knew his private train had been given unrestricted priority through the Rockies, and everyone at Black Ridge Station had been ordered to remain out of its way. Everyone except Natalie. She stood in the signal room wearing a Navy conductor's coat over her uniform, one hand resting on the edge of the control panel while wind battered the station windows. She was 32 years old, 5'8", broad-hipped and full-figured, with dark auburn hair twisted into a practical knot at the base of her neck. She had spent 11 years working mountain rail lines, beginning as a ticket agent before learning operations, emergency braking systems, track maintenance protocols, and every dangerous curve between Denver and the Western Valleys. The railway was not simply a job to her. It was the shape of her life. Her father had maintained the same tracks before a heart attack took him at 56. Her mother had sold the family home to cover his medical bills. Natalie had remained with the railway through layoffs, corporate restructuring, and a slow financial collapse everyone pretended not to see. People often underestimated her because she was warm, because she smiled at nervous passengers, because her body did not resemble the sharp, narrow image some executives considered professional. They stopped underestimating her during emergencies. At 11:43 p.m., Natalie noticed the eastbound signal flicker green, then red, then green again. The system had been behaving strangely for 6 minutes. Her assistant conductor, Owen Price, leaned over the panel, probably ice in the relay. Natalie watched the track display. "No, Nat, The Bellini train is 4 minutes out. Dispatch already cleared them. The pressure sensor at mile marker 218 just went dead. So did 3 others last week. Not like this. Owen sighed. He was 26, capable but impatient, and still believed machines failed more often than people lied. Natalie pulled up the thermal feed from a maintenance camera positioned above the mountain pass. Static filled the monitor. For half a second, a shape appeared beside the track. A dark figure bent near the rail. Then the feed went black. Natalie's pulse tightened. She grabbed the radio. Blackridge control to Bellini Limited. Reduce speed immediately. Possible track obstruction ahead. Silence. Then a man's voice answered. Bellini Limited. Has priority clearance. I understand your clearance. Reduce speed. This channel is reserved for authorized dispatch. I am the senior conductor on this line. Another pause. This time the reply carried open contempt. You are delaying, Mr. Bellini. Natalie stared through the window as the train's headlight appeared in the distant snow. I'm trying to prevent Mr. Bellini from driving over a compromised section of rail. Owen looked at her sharply. You don't know that. No, she said. I know the sensors were disabled one after another in the exact sequence his train is approaching them. She reached for the emergency track control. Owen caught her wrist. If you throw that signal, you'll lock the eastern switch. His engineer will have to brake hard. If I don't, he could derail at 218. And if you're wrong? Natalie looked at the growing light beyond the station. If I'm wrong, a powerful man will be angry with me. Her hand settled over the control. If I'm right, he stays alive. She threw the switch. The signal turned red. An emergency flare ignited automatically on the track. The Bellini Limited sounded its horn, long and furious, as its brakes engaged. The entire station vibrated. Steel shrieked against steel. The private train slowed through curtains of snow and stopped less than 80 yards beyond the platform. For 2 seconds, no one moved. Then every railway worker inside the station began talking at once. What did you do? Are you insane? Do you know who's on that train? Owen stared at Natalie in disbelief. You stopped Marco Bellini. I stopped a locomotive. You stopped his locomotive. The side door of the first carriage opened. 4 men in black overcoats stepped onto the platform. Each carried a weapon beneath his coat. They spread out with the smooth precision of men trained to expect violence. A 5th man followed. He was older than the others, perhaps in his early 40s, with close-cropped dark hair and a narrow face. His coat was expensive, his posture rigid. Vittorio Salvi. Natalie recognized him from a news photograph taken outside a federal courthouse. Marco Bellini's chief lieutenant, the man rumored to have stood beside Marco since they were teenagers. Vittorio crossed the platform toward her. Behind the station windows, several employees actually stepped backward. Natalie walked outside before he could enter. Snow gathered on her shoulders. Who authorized the stop? Vittorio demanded. I did. His gaze moved over her uniform, her conductor's badge, and finally her face. You have 60 seconds to clear the signal. The track ahead may be sabotaged. It has already been inspected. By whom? Vittorio's expression hardened. That information is not your concern. If someone inspected mile marker 218, ask them why the thermal camera went down while a person was standing beside the rail. The station door opened behind Natalie. Owen stepped outside, nervous but unwilling to leave her alone. Vittorio glanced at him. Is she always this difficult? Owen hesitated. Natalie answered for herself. Only when people try to intimidate me, instead of addressing the problem. One of Vittorio's men gave a quiet laugh. Not because the situation was funny, because he thought she had no idea whom she was challenging. Vittorio stepped closer. Miss Reed, Mr. Bellini does not tolerate delays. Then Mr. Bellini should be grateful I noticed someone creating one. The laughter stopped. A different voice came from the platform. Gratefulness is a rare emotion in my family. Every man near the train straightened. Marco Bellini descended from the carriage. He wore no hat despite the snow. His black hair was brushed back from a strong, severe face, and his charcoal suit remained perfectly tailored beneath his open wool coat. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, and moved without hurry. Power did not announce itself around him. It adjusted the room before he entered. His gaze found Natalie immediately. Not Vittorio. Not the station manager hurrying nervously from the building. Here, Marco approached until only a few feet separated them. Natalie had faced furious passengers, drunk tourists, corporate inspectors, and one armed fugitive who tried to hide in a sleeper car. None of them had looked at her the way Marco Bellini did, as if silence were a method of interrogation. "You stopped my train," he said. Natalie held his cursor. Yes. Several employees watched from the station windows. Someone whispered something. A few men smiled nervously, already imagining how quickly Natalie would be fired. Marco looked toward the eastern track. On what evidence? Disabled pressure sensors, a cut camera feed, a thermal image showing someone beside the rail. Could be maintenance. Maintenance crews are not authorized in that sector tonight. Could be equipment failure. 3 independent systems failed in sequence as your train approached. His eyes narrowed slightly. "You believe someone knew my route. I believe the mountain doesn't care how powerful you are." For the first time, something shifted in his expression. Not amusement. Interest. Behind him, Vittorio spoke sharply. "Marco, we should continue. This delay exposes you." Natalie turned toward the tracks. "If you continue, you may be driving directly into the exposure." Vittorio's jaw tightened. Marco kept watching her. "What do you recommend?" "We send a maintenance team by snow vehicle. Until they confirm the track is secure, your train stays here." "That could take hours." "Yes, and if you are wrong, I'll accept the consequences." Marco stepped closer. The snow between them seemed to disappear. "Do you know what my consequences usually look like?" Natalie's heart beat hard, but she did not step back. "I know what a derailment looks like." Silence spread across the platform. Then Marco turned to Vittorio. "Send 2 men with the railway team." Vittorio stared at him. "You're indulging her." "No," Marco said. "I'm verifying her." The maintenance vehicle left 6 minutes later with 2 railway engineers and 2 of Marco's guards. Natalie returned to the signal room. No one laughed now. The Bellini security team occupied the platform, the waiting room, and both entrances. Their presence transformed the small mountain station into a fortified outpost. Marco remained outside for several minutes, speaking quietly with Vittorio. Natalie tried not to watch him through the glass. She failed. He carried danger with an almost elegant restraint. He never raised his voice. He barely moved while others leaned closer to hear him. Men twice as loud seemed smaller beside him. Owen stood near the control panel. "You could still apologize." "For what?" "For stopping a Mafia Boss's train." "I would have stopped anyone." "That may be the problem." Natalie looked at the blank thermal monitor. "No. The problem is that someone was on that track." At 12:16 a.m., the maintenance team radioed in. The engineer's voice shook. "Black Ridge. We found damage at 218. Natalie gripped the microphone. "What kind?" A long pause followed. "Both inner rail fasteners have been cut. There's an explosive charge beneath the southern tie." No one in the signal room breathed. The engineer continued. "If the train had crossed at full speed, the rail would have separated over Grayson Gorge." Owen went pale. The gorge was 800 feet deep. Natalie turned toward the platform. Marco was already looking at her through the window. The maintenance team had used an open channel. He had heard everything. Vittorio's expression revealed shock. Marco's revealed nothing. He entered the station alone. The employees moved out of his way. He stopped before Natalie. "You saved 43 lives," he said. She swallowed. "There are 43 people aboard? 38 of mine. 5 railway crew. You included yourself? Should I not?" I assumed men like you counted yourselves separately. A faint line appeared between his brows. Men like me. Men who make everyone else afraid to breathe. Someone behind them shifted nervously. Marco lowered his voice. You are not afraid to breathe. I'm trying not to make it obvious. The answer surprised him. She saw it. For one brief moment, the cold precision in his eyes gave way to something almost human. Then Vittorio entered. We need to return to Denver, he said. Immediately. Natalie looked at the control map. The western line is blocked by an avalanche warning. The eastern rail is damaged. No train moves tonight. We have vehicles coming. The mountain road closed 20 minutes ago. A helicopter. Wind speeds are above the safe limit. Vittorio turned to Marco. We cannot remain exposed in a public station. Marco's gaze stayed on Natalie. What train leaves next? The Midnight Crest, she said. Passenger service to Denver. It's due in 12 minutes, but I'm holding it here because of the closure. We'll board it. Natalie blinked. The Midnight Crest carries 86 passengers. Then it already has witnesses, Marco said, which makes it less predictable than my private train. Vittorio stepped closer. That is not secure. Neither was our route. The words landed heavily. Marco looked at his lieutenant. Someone knew where we would be. Vittorio's face remained still. Yes, and until I know who, nobody leaves my sight. The Midnight Crest arrived at 12:31 a.m. A weather-beaten passenger train with 6 carriages, a dining car, and 1 sleeper section. Natalie was its chief conductor. Normally, she would have felt relief stepping aboard. That night, the train felt like a moving trap. Marco's men searched every carriage before allowing him to board. Passengers whispered as the armed entourage moved through the aisle. Some recognized Marco. Others only sensed the fear around him. Natalie directed his group into the rear observation car, which had wide windows, leather seating, and a small private office used by conductors during long-distance routes. Vittorio objected immediately. Too many windows. It's the only carriage with an independent emergency brake and direct roof access, Natalie said. Marco looked at her. You considered an attack. I consider every emergency. That sounds exhausting. It keeps people alive. He entered the conductor's office. Vittorio followed, but Marco stopped him with a glance. I want the passenger list checked again. We already checked it. Check it again. Vittorio looked from Marco to Natalie. The hesitation lasted less than a second. Then he left. Marco closed the office door. Natalie was alone with him. The room suddenly felt smaller. Outside, the train began moving slowly along a maintenance spur that would take them west to an emergency siding. The storm intensified, striking the windows in hard bursts of snow. Marco removed his gloves. There was a thin scar across his right hand. Natalie noticed another near his wrist, partly hidden beneath his cuff. He noticed her noticing. You study everyone this closely? Only passengers likely to cause trouble. His gaze settled on her mouth before returning to her eyes. Am I a passenger? At the moment. And later? That depends on whether your men follow my safety instructions. He leaned one hand against the desk. You gave orders to Vittorio on the platform. He was interfering with an active railway emergency. People have died for less. That sounds inefficient. A quiet breath left him. Not laughter. Close. Natalie looked toward the window. Why did you listen to me? Because you believed what you were saying. That has never stopped powerful men from ignoring me. No, Marco said. But you were willing to humiliate yourself publicly if it meant preventing strangers from dying. I didn't humiliate myself. They laughed at you. She met his eyes again. They stopped. Marco watched her for a long moment. Yes, he said. They did. The train entered a tunnel. Darkness pressed against the windows before the emergency lights flickered on. Marco moved closer without appearing to. Natalie became aware of his height, the warmth of him in the chilled office, and the quiet danger of standing within reach of a man who controlled violence as easily as other men controlled conversation. "You should be afraid of me," he said. "I am." His expression changed almost imperceptibly. "Yet you challenged me. Courage isn't the absence of fear. What is it?" Knowing something else matters more. Marco's eyes held hers. "What mattered more? Everyone on your train. Not me specifically. You were included." His mouth tightened. Natalie wondered if he was unused to being treated as part of a group, or unused to someone refusing to flatter him. The tunnel ended. Moonlight and snow flashed across his face. He lifted his hand as if he meant to touch a loose strand of hair near her cheek. He stopped before his fingers reached her. The silence between them deepened. Then the office door opened. Vittorio stood outside. "We have a problem." Marco's hand lowered. "What?" "One passenger is missing from the manifest." Natalie frowned. "That's impossible. A man boarded at Blackridge using a ticket issued to someone who died 2 weeks ago." Marco's expression became cold. "Find him." The missing passenger was not in any seat, compartment, restroom, or luggage area. Natalie ordered the train slowed. Marco's men split into teams and searched the carriages while snow buried the tracks behind them. The passengers became restless. A mother traveling with 2 children asked Natalie whether they were in danger. Natalie smiled calmly and told her there was a mechanical inspection. She hated the lie, but panic inside a sealed train could kill faster than fear outside it. In the dining car, a heavy-set businessman complained about the delay. Near the rear carriage, 2 college students whispered about Marco. At the front, the engineer reported a strange pressure drop in the braking system. Natalie immediately headed toward the service compartment. Marco followed. "You need to stay with your security team," she said. "They are searching. So should you." "I am. For the passenger. For the person most likely to be targeted." Natalie looked back at him. "You cannot guard yourself by following me." His face remained unreadable. "I'm not guarding myself." The meaning reached her slowly. Before she could respond, the train lurched. The lights went out. A woman screamed in the next carriage. Emergency lighting flickered on as Natalie grabbed the wall. Marco's hand closed around her waist, steadying her. His grip was firm and instinctive. For one suspended second, her back was against his chest. His breath touched her hair. Neither moved. Then a loud metallic bang came from beneath the floor. Natalie pulled away. That was the brake line. She opened the service compartment and climbed down the narrow metal steps. Marco followed, despite her protest. The lower chamber was cramped, filled with pipes, gauges, and the smell of hot metal. Natalie knelt beside the pressure regulator. A valve had been loosened manually. "This wasn't a malfunction," she said. Marco crouched beside her. "Can you repair it? If the secondary line is intact." A movement flickered behind them. Marco turned. A man, in a railway maintenance jacket, swung a steel wrench toward Natalie's head. Marco caught his wrist. The attack became brutally fast. He drove the man into the wall, struck him once in the ribs, and twisted his arm until the wrench fell. The attacker reached for a knife. Marco slammed his forearm against the man's throat. Natalie saw the instant Marco decided to kill him. "Don't," she said. Marco's hand stopped. The attacker gasped. "We need him alive," Natalie continued. "He knows what was done to the train." Marco looked at her. Something dark moved behind his eyes. Then he released enough pressure to let the man breathe. The attacker smiled through bloody teeth. "You should have crossed the gorge." Marco's face went still. "Who sent you?" The man spat at his shoes. Marco did not react. He only looked at Natalie. "Go upstairs." "No. He may have explosives." "Then you need someone who understands the train." Marco's jaw flexed. The attacker lunged suddenly, pulling a small detonator from his sleeve. Natalie kicked the emergency drain valve. Scalding steam burst across the chamber. The attacker cried out and dropped the device. Marco seized him, drove him to the floor, and crushed the detonator beneath his heel. For the first time, anger broke through Marco's control. He struck the man hard enough to knock him unconscious. Then he turned toward Natalie. "Are you burned?" "No." He caught her wrist and examined her hand. The steam had reddened her fingers. "It's nothing. It is not nothing." His voice was low and sharp. "I've had worse." "That does not make this acceptable." Natalia stared at him. The most feared man in America stood in a freezing service chamber, holding her hand as if a minor burn were a personal offense. His thumb passed once over the inside of her wrist. The touch was brief. It was also more intimate than it had any right to be. Marco seemed to realize it at the same moment. He released her slowly. "Repair the brake," he said, but his voice was no longer entirely steady. They restrained the attacker in an empty luggage room. He carried no identification. Inside his jacket, they found a map of the train and a photograph of Marco boarding in Denver earlier that evening. On the back of the photograph, someone had written a time and location: 2:10 a.m. Whitehaven Cut. Natalie felt cold, despite the heated carriage. Whitehaven Cut was a narrow passage between two mountain walls, 6 miles ahead. No road access, no radio reception, no escape route. "We turn around," Vittorio said. "The switch behind us froze after we passed it," Natalie replied. "We cannot reverse safely until the maintenance crew clears it. Then we stop here. The grade is too steep. If the repaired brake line loses pressure, the train could slide." Marco studied the route map. "What is beyond Whitehaven?" "An old freight siding and a maintenance lodge. How defensible." "Better than the train." Vittorio shook his head. "We would be walking into a scheduled ambush." Natalie pointed to a secondary line on the map. "There is another route." The men looked at her. "A mining spur branches off 1/2 mile before Whitehaven. It has not been used in 8 years. Is it operational?" Marco asked. "I don't know." Vittorio gave a bitter laugh. "You want us to drive an occupied passenger train onto an abandoned track in a blizzard? I want the passengers away from an ambush point. Your instincts already created this situation." Marco's gaze lifted. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. "Her instincts saved your life," he said. Vittorio's face tightened. "And yours." Marco stepped closer to him. "Do not forget that." Vittorio lowered his head. Of course, Natalie watched the exchange. The apology sounded correct. It did not feel sincere. Marco turned to her. "What do you need to inspect the spur?" "A flashlight. A radio. 10 minutes. You are not going alone. I know the track, and the people hunting me know the route. I'll take Owen." "No." The single word ended the discussion. Marco put on his gloves. "You'll take me." The train slowed near the abandoned junction. Natalie and Marco climbed down into knee-deep snow, while his security team formed a perimeter around them. The storm had swallowed the world. The passenger carriages glowed behind them like a chain of dim lanterns. Beyond the track, black pines bent beneath the wind. Natalie carried a flashlight and a steel inspection bar. Marco carried a handgun beneath his coat. They walked side by side along the buried rail. "You should have sent one of your men," she said. "I trust their aim, not their judgment. Not tonight." She glanced at him. "You think someone close to you arranged this?" "Only 6 people knew my route." "Vittorio." Marco's eyes stayed on the track. "Vittorio has stood beside me for 21 years. That wasn't an answer." "No." Snow caught in Natalie's hair. She brushed it away. Marco watched the movement. "Why did you become a conductor?" "My father worked these lines. He wanted this life for you. He wanted me to become an accountant. That would have been safer. I would have been miserable." "And this makes you happy?" Natalie looked back at the train. "At 4 in the morning, when the passengers are asleep and the mountains are dark, you can hear the rails singing under the wheels. Most people never notice it, but every section has a different sound." Marco studied her face. "You love it?" "Yes." The answer came without hesitation. Something unreadable crossed his expression. They reached the old switch. Ice packed the mechanism. Natalie knelt and struck it with the inspection bar. The metal did not move. Marco crouched beside her. What happens if it is locked? We reach Whitehaven in 17 minutes. He took the bar from her. Show me where. You'll ruin your coat. I have others. You may not have another spine if you pull incorrectly. His eyes met hers. Then guide me. She positioned his hands on the lever. His body came close behind hers as they worked. Natalie felt the hard line of his chest near her shoulder, the warmth of his breath against her temple. Pull, when I say, she murmured. You give orders easily. Only when I know what I'm doing. And when you don't, I improvise. Dangerous. You followed me into a blizzard. A pause. Yes. The switch gave a violent crack. Natalie slipped. Marco caught her around the waist before she fell across the rail. Their faces stopped inches apart. Snow gathered on his lashes. His hand spanned the curve of her side. Natalie's palm rested against his chest, directly over the steady beat of his heart. For once, Marco Bellini did not look cold. He looked caught, not by the weather, by her. His gaze dropped to her lips. Natalie forgot the mountain, forgot the men watching from the train, forgot that touching him should have felt dangerous. It did feel dangerous, just not in the way she expected. Marco's fingers tightened, slightly. Then a rifle shot split the night. He dragged her down. The bullet struck the switch post. Back to the train, he ordered. Dark figures moved among the trees. Marco fired toward them, while Natalie crawled behind the rail embankment. His guards returned fire from beside the locomotive. The forest erupted with muzzle flashes. Marco reached for her. Run. They sprinted through the snow. Halfway to the train, a gunman rose behind a maintenance shed and aimed directly at Natalie. Marco saw him first. He stepped between them. The shot struck Marco high in the shoulder. His body jerked. Natalie caught him before he fell. Marco, I'm fine. You've been shot. It passed through. Blood spread beneath his coat. He fired back one-handed. The gunman dropped. More shots cut across the track. They reached the rear carriage, where two guards pulled them aboard. Marco refused help until Natalie was safely inside. Only then did he allow the door to close. The abandoned spur bought them 9 miles. It did not buy them safety. The attackers had vehicles on an old logging road parallel to the track. Their headlights appeared intermittently through the forest, following the train. Natalie brought the Midnight Crest to the freight siding near an isolated maintenance lodge. The building was half buried in snow, but its emergency generator still worked. Passengers were moved inside under armed guard. Marco remained on the train while Natalie treated his shoulder in the conductor's office. He sat shirtless on the edge of the desk. Natalie tried not to star. Scars marked his chest and ribs, old bullet wounds, a knife wound near his abdomen, another pale line crossing his collarbone. His body told a history no newspaper had ever printed. The newest bullet had passed through the muscle of his upper shoulder. Pain must have been intense. Marco showed none. Natalie cleaned the wound. You should see a surgeon. I have one waiting in Denver. That is not helpful while we are trapped on a mountain. You sound irritated. I am. Because I was shot? Because you stepped in front of a bullet. It was aimed at you. That does not improve my mood. Marco watched her wrap the bandage. Would you have preferred? I let it hit you. I would prefer neither of us be shot. A generous philosophy. She tied the bandage firmly. He did not react. Natalie looked at the scars across his chest. How many times? Enough. That is not a number. It is the only one you are getting. She lifted her eyes. Why? Because you are looking at me, as if the answer might hurt you. Her hand still. Marco's voice softened, though no warmth entered it. Do not do that. Do what? Curry. The word hung between them. Natalie stepped back. You saved my life. I protected an asset. Her face cooled. Is that what I am? Marco's jaw tightened. He had chosen the wrong words deliberately. She could see it. A wall raised, because the moment had become too intimate. Natalie gathered the bloodied cloths. Your asset needs to check the passengers. She moved toward the door. Marco caught her hand. The contact was immediate, almost desperate. Then, he seemed to regret revealing it. His grip loosened but did not disappear. Natalie. It was the first time he had said her name. Not Miss Reed. Not Conductor. Natalie. His voice transformed it into something private. She looked at him. For several seconds he said nothing. Whatever confession had almost reached his mouth retreated behind control. "Be careful," he said instead. She pulled her hand free. "So should you." Inside the maintenance lodge, passengers gathered around old wooden tables while snow battered the roof. Natalie moved among them, answering questions and checking for injuries. A little girl named Emma had lost one mitten. Natalie found a spare pair in the emergency supply cabinet and helped her put them on. Marco entered during the exchange. He had dressed again, his injured arm hidden beneath his coat. Every conversation in the room quieted. The little girl looked up at him. "Are you the bad man?" Her mother turned pale. "Emma." Marco stopped. Natalie pressed her lips together. The child continued. "The man in the dining car said you were a bad man, and that bad men brought the people with guns." Marco looked across the room. "Which man?" Emma pointed toward the far wall. The heavy-set businessman who had complained earlier stood abruptly. "I never said that." One of Marco's guards moved toward him. The businessman panicked and reached inside his coat. Marco drew his weapon. Natalie stepped between them. "Wait." The businessman froze. Natalie looked at his hand. "Take it out slowly." He withdrew a silver inhaler. "I have asthma." The room exhaled. Marco did not lower his gun immediately. Natalie turned toward Emma. "What exactly did he say?" The girl glanced nervously at the adults. "He said the bad man would be dead before the red light stopped blinking." Natalie's blood chilled. "What red light?" Emma pointed toward the ceiling. A tiny red glow blinked inside the lodge's smoke detector. Natalia stared at it. "That is not a smoke detector." Marco seized her arm and pulled her behind him. "Everyone outside." Now. The device exploded before they reached the door. The blast tore through the ceiling. Wood and insulation rained down. The room filled with smoke and screams. Natalie hit the floor. Marco covered her with his body again, one arm protecting her head while debris struck his back. Flames spread across the rafters. His men forced open the rear exit. Passengers stumbled into the snow. Natalie coughed and tried to stand. Marco kept hold of her. "Can you walk?" "Yes." A burning beam crashed between them and the exit. The floorboards groaned. Marco lifted Natalie into his arms. She gasped. "Put me down." "No. I can walk. I'm aware." He carried her through the smoke as if her weight meant nothing. Outside, snow hissed against his blood-stained coat. Passengers watched the feared Mafia Boss emerge from the burning lodge, with the plus-size conductor held against his chest. Marco did not look at any of them, only Natalie. He set her down near the train but kept one hand around the back of her neck. "Look at me." "I'm fine. Look at me." She met his eyes. His composure was cracking, not visibly enough for anyone else to notice, but Natalie felt it in the pressure of his hand. He was afraid, not of the attackers, of losing her. "I'm all right," she said more softly. His thumb moved once beneath her ear. Then Vittorio approached. The lodge was prepared in advance. Whoever planned this knew we would divert. Natalie looked at him. How could anyone know that? Vittorio's expression remained grave. They anticipated every possibility. "No," Natalie said. They knew the old spur was usable. So, railway operations removed it from active maps 8 years ago. Marco's gaze sharpened. Who had access? Current dispatch managers, senior conductors, the company's ownership office, and anyone who purchased the railway. Natalie turned toward him. "What?" Marco became very still. Vittorio looked away. Natalie stepped closer. "What did you say?" Marco's silence answered before his words did. The holding company that purchased Blackridge Rail, she said slowly. Belmont Infrastructure. He did not deny it. Her heartbeat changed. Belmont. The first 4 letters of Bellini. The name now seemed insultingly obvious. You own the railway. I control the majority interest. You bought it 8 months ago. Yes. The fire behind them illuminated his face. Natalie remembered the day the employees learned the bankrupt railway had found an anonymous buyer. Everyone had expected layoffs. Instead, pensions were restored. Maintenance budgets increased. The mountain routes remained open. Her job had been saved. Dozens of jobs had been saved. Why? She asked. Marco looked toward the passengers. This is not the place. No. You do not get to decide that. His men shifted uneasily. No one spoke to Marco Bellini that way. Natalie did. You knew who I was before tonight. Yes. How long? Marco's expression gave her nothing. How long, Marco? 3 years. The answer struck harder than the explosion. Natalie stared at him. You have known my name for 3 years. Yes. Why? Vittorio stepped forward. We need to secure the train. Marco raised one hand. Vittorio stopped. Marco's gaze did not leave Natalie. Your father once prevented a freight collision outside Silver Junction. Natalie frowned. That was 20 years ago. One of the freight cars carried my mother. She went still. Marco continued. She was traveling under another name. Your father saw a signal error and manually switched the track. He saved her life. My father never mentioned it. He did not know who she was. That explains helping the railway. It does not explain knowing me. Marco's injured shoulder had begun bleeding through the bandage again. He ignored it. 3 years ago, my office reviewed transportation assets connected to Western Distribution. Your name appeared in a personnel report. That sounds romantic. His eyes hardened at the sarcasm. I remembered Reed. So you investigated me? Yes. Why? At first, gratitude, and after that, silence. Snow settled in Natalie's hair. Marco looked at her, as if the truth cost him more than blood. I watched you testify against the company that ignored a brake defect. Natalie remembered the hearing. She had risked her career to expose executives who had concealed safety reports. You were there? No. I obtained the recording. Of course you did. You refused a settlement. You refused promotion in exchange for silence. You stayed when the company began collapsing, because 73 employees would lose their pensions if senior staff abandoned the restructuring. His voice had changed. The coldness remained. But something deeper moved beneath it. You knew the company would fail. Natalie said, Yes. So you bought it? Yes. For the employees? Marco looked directly at her. For you. The storm seemed to disappear. Natalie could hear only the crackle of the burning lodge and her own uneven breathing. You purchased an entire railway to save my job, to preserve your life as you had chosen it. You had never spoken to me. I did not need to disturb you. The confession was not tender. It was worse. It was obsessive, controlled, and almost unbearably intimate. Natalie took a step back. You watched me. I made certain you were safe. Those are not the same thing. No. Did you place cameras? Not in your home. The answer came too quickly. Her eyes widened. Marco's jaw tightened. There were security cameras at the station and on railway property, which you monitored when necessary. Necessary to whom? To me. Anger rose through the confusion. You do not get to protect me without my knowledge and call it kindness. I never called it kindness. What do you call it? Marco looked at her with the stillness of a man finally cornered by something he could not threaten. Restraint. Natalie's breath caught. He took one step toward her. I wanted to meet you. I chose not to. Why? Because everything near me becomes a target. The burning lodge collapsed behind him, sending sparks into the snow. And now? She asked. Now they already know you matter. Before Natalie could answer, one of Marco's guards ran toward them. We found a transmitter beneath the rear carriage. Vittorio looked at Marco. They're tracking us. Marco's face turned lethal. Search everyone. The transmitter had been mounted beneath the observation car before the midnight crest left Denver. Only railway maintenance staff or someone with access to Marco's security staging area could have placed it there. Marco ordered the passengers moved back aboard, while his men prepared the train to leave. The burning lodge made their location visible for miles. Natalie stood alone in the conductor's office, staring at the railway ownership documents Marco had handed her. Her name did not appear. His did not either. There were layers of companies, trusts, and investment groups, but his signature rested on the final authorization. Marco entered quietly. She did not turn. How often did you watch me? Not often. That is not an answer. Whenever there was a threat. I did not know there were threats. You were not supposed to. She faced him. Did you stop me from losing promotions? No. Did you influence my salary? I corrected the company's compensation structure. You raised my salary. You were underpaid. That was not your decision. It was mathematically obvious. Despite everything, Natalie almost laughed. She did not. Was tonight planned by someone who knew about me? I don't know. You said they know I matter. They saw how I responded. To what? To you. The words settled between them. Natalie looked at the blood spreading across his shoulder. You're bleeding again. It can wait. No. She pulled the medical kit from the cabinet. Marco watched as she cut away the ruined bandage. You're angry with me, he said. Yes, yet you are treating me. I can be angry and still not let you bleed to death. His gaze lowered to her hands. That may be the most dangerous thing about you. What? You care without surrendering judgment. Natalie cleaned the wound again. You confuse care with ownership. I know the difference. Do you? Yes. His answer was quiet. Ownership is easy. Her fingers slowed. And care? Marco looked at her face. Care requires the possibility of losing. For once, there was no armor in his voice. Natalie tied the bandage and stepped back. A violent jolt shook the carriage. The train began moving. She frowned. I didn't authorize departure. Marco was already reaching for his weapon. The intercom crackled. Owen's voice came through, strained and breathless. Natalie. Someone took the engine. The train accelerated. Natalie ran toward the front. Marco and 6 guards followed. Passengers cried out as the midnight crest gathered speed on the descending grade. Through the windows, the burning lodge disappeared behind them. The speed indicator climbed. 20 miles per hour. 30. Forte. On a mountain track designed for half that speed. Natalie reached the 3rd carriage and nearly lost her footing as the train rounded a curve. Owen, she shouted into the radio. Who is in the engine? I don't know. The engineer is unconscious. The cab door is locked. Can you access the rear controls? Disconnected. Marco stayed close behind Natalie. What happens ahead? She pictured the track. Whitehaven Cut. The ambush point. In 6 minutes. Vittorio appeared from the forward carriage. There are vehicles on both sides of the track. Marco looked at him. How do you know? Vittorio paused. The hesitation was small. Natalie saw it. So did Marco. Vittorio's hand moved toward his coat. Marco drew first. The 2 men faced each other in the rocking carriage. Passengers screamed and ducked behind seats. Vittorio's men raised weapons. Marco's men raised theirs. 21 years of loyalty ended in a single breath. Marco's voice was calm. You knew the lodge would be compromised. Vittorio's face emptied of pretense. I knew you would follow her. Natalie felt the world narrow. Marco's weapon remained aimed at his oldest friend. You placed the bomb at the gorge. I authorized it. 43 people were on that train. You have sacrificed more for less. Not civilians. Do not pretend morality now. Vittorio's gaze moved toward Natalie. You purchased a railway for a woman who did not know your name. You redirected resources, cancelled routes, exposed our network, all to keep her comfortable. Marco stepped between them. The movement was immediate, possessive, protective. Vittorio smiled without warmth. There. That is why you had to die. You sold my roots to the Carbone family. I built half those roots. You built them under my protection. I built them while you inherited a throne. Marco's expression did not change, but grief moved briefly through his eyes. Vittorio had not merely betrayed a boss. He had betrayed the boy who once trusted him. The train reached 50 miles per hour. Natalie looked toward the next curve. If we do not slow down, none of this matters. Vittorio glanced at her. You should have let his train cross the gorge. Marco's finger tightened on the trigger. Natalie touched his wrist. Not yet. His eyes turned toward her. He knows who is driving the engine. Vittorio laughed softly. She understands you already. Marco lowered the weapon half an inch. Who is in the cab? Vittorio said nothing. Marco fired into the wall beside his head. Passengers screamed again. Who? Owen Price. Natalie started. No. Vittorio's smile deepened. Your assistant has expensive debts. The intercom clicked on. Owen's voice came through the carriage speakers. I'm sorry, Nat. Pain cut through her. She had trained him, defended him, trusted him. Owen, unlock the cab. I can't. You can. They have my sister. Vittorio rolled his eyes. No one has his sister. We paid him. Owen went silent. Natalie's heartbreak hardened into clarity. Where are you supposed to stop the train? At Whitehaven. For the gunman? Yes. And after they kill Marco? Another silence. Natalie knew the answer. They would kill every witness, including Owen. Owen. They are not letting you leave this mountain. I have a car waiting. There are no roads open. They said. They lied. The train entered a curve. The carriages tilted violently. Luggage fell from overhead racks. Marco seized Natalie and anchored her against his body. Vittorio used the movement to fire. The bullet grazed Marco's side. Chaos erupted. Marco's guards returned fire. Vittorio escaped through the forward door, with 2 loyal men while the others fell. Marco started after him. Natalie caught his coat. The train. He will reach the engine. So do they. They climbed onto the roof. The storm struck like a wall. Natalie nearly slid off immediately. Marco locked one arm around her waist and pulled her against him. Below them, the train raced through the Black Mountain Pass. Snow blinded them. Gunfire flashed from the forward roof. Marco pushed Natalie behind an exhaust housing and returned fire. A bullet tore through the metal beside her face. He moved in front of her. Stay down. You're injured. I am still difficult to kill. They advanced carriage by carriage. At the gap between 2 roofs, Natalie jumped first. Her boot slipped on ice. For one terrifying second, she hung over the rushing track with one hand gripping the roof edge. Marco dropped his weapon and caught her wrist. The wounded muscles in his shoulder tore open. Blood ran down his hand. Do not let go, he said. I wasn't planning to. He hauled her upward. A gunman appeared behind him. Natalie grabbed Marco's fallen weapon and fired. The shot struck the man's leg. He fell sideways and disappeared into the snow. Marco stared at her. I aimed low, she said breathlessly. You fired my gun. He was going to kill you. A strange, fierce emotion crossed his face. You cannot do that. Save your life. Risk yours for mine. She rose, still holding the gun. You have been doing it all night. That is different. Because you own the railway? Because I... He stopped. The confession almost came. Then another burst of gunfire struck the roof. Marco covered her again. They reached the locomotive with less than 2 minutes before Whitehaven cut. The cab door was locked from inside. Natalie pounded on the glass. Owen. He looked back at her, pale and crying. Vittorio stood beside him with a weapon. Marco fired through the side window. Vittorio ducked. The glass shattered. Natalie reached through and unlocked the door. Marco entered first. Vittorio shot him. The bullet struck Marco low in the abdomen. He staggered but did not fall. Natalie screamed his name. Marco fired back. Vittorio's weapon flew from his hand. Owen released the controls and backed into the wall. The train continued accelerating. Natalie dropped beside the brake console. The main line had been disabled. She opened the emergency panel. Wires had been cut. How long? Marco asked. She looked through the windshield. The dark mouth of Whitehaven Cut waited ahead. 40 seconds. Vittorio lunged toward Natalie with a knife. Marco intercepted him. The two men crashed against the cab wall. Vittorio drove his fist into Marco's wound. Marco's face went white. He still held on. They fought with the terrible intimacy of men who knew each other's weaknesses. Every strike carried 21 years of shared history. You abandoned the family for her, Vittorio hissed. Marco slammed him against the controls. She is not the reason you betrayed me. She made you weak. No. Marco's eyes found Natalie. She made weakness worth surviving. Natalie tore open the secondary brake housing. The mechanical release cable remained intact beneath the floor. She wrapped both hands around it and pulled. Nothing happened. Owen, she shouted, help me. He stood frozen. You betrayed me, she said. You do not get to stand there and watch everyone die. Shame broke across his face. He dropped beside her and seized the cable. Together, they pulled. The emergency brake engaged. Steele screamed. The train shuddered violently. Passengers were thrown from their seats. Whitehaven Cut rushed toward them. Too fast. Natalie looked through the windshield and saw armed vehicles blocking the track inside the pass. We're not stopping. Marco drove Vittorio into the wall and looked toward her. What do you need? The reverse lever. It's jammed, Owen said. Natalie grabbed the inspection hammer from the emergency cabinet. She struck the lever once, twice. The mechanism broke loose. Marco reached her as the train entered the cut. He wrapped both hands around the reverse lever. Now? He asked. Now. They pulled together. The locomotive roared. The wheels locked. Sparks exploded along the rails. The first armored vehicle grew larger through the windshield. 30 yards. 20. 10. The Midnight Crest stopped with its steel nose less than 4 feet from the vehicle. Silence followed. Then gunmen opened fire. Bullets tore through the locomotive windows. Marco pushed Natalie to the floor and covered her with his body. The windshield shattered over them. Owen cried out and fell. Vittorio crawled toward his discarded weapon. Marco saw him. Their eyes met. Vittorio's hand closed around the gun. You should have stayed alone, he said. Marco's expression became almost peaceful. I was never alone. Vittorio raised the weapon toward Natalie. Marco fired first. The shot struck Vittorio in the chest. His oldest friend fell beside the controls. For a moment, Marco did not move. Then, explosions detonated beneath the rear carriages. The train rocked. Natalie lifted her head. They attached charges. Marco looked toward the open cab door. His men were fighting through the carriages. Outside, dozens of attackers moved along both sides of the train. The Midnight Crest had become a steel corridor of fire. Marco stood, despite the blood soaking his shirt. You stay here. No. Natalie, the passengers are trapped. My men will protect them. Your men do not know the emergency exits. His face hardened. You are not going into that train. I am its conductor. And I am telling you, you do not own me. The words struck him. Natalie stepped closer. You bought the railway. You watched from a distance. You decided what dangers I was allowed to know. But you do not get to decide who I am when people need me. Gunfire echoed from the second carriage. Marco stared at her. Then, slowly, He took a second weapon from his coat and placed it in her hand. "Stay behind me." "I know." They moved through the train together. Marco fought with controlled brutality, every shot precise despite his wounds. Natalie directed passengers through connecting doors, released emergency panels, and led families toward the reinforced dining car. At the fourth carriage, attackers breached a side entrance. A gunman aimed at a teenage boy frozen in the aisle. Natalie shoved the boy down. Marco shot the attacker. Another man appeared behind Natalie. Marco crossed the distance and drove him through a window. Glass and snow erupted around them. He turned immediately toward Natalie. "Are you hurt?" "No." He touched her face, his blood streaking her cheek. For one breath, the war vanished. His eyes searched hers with naked terror. Then the rear door exploded inward. Marco used his body to shield her. The blast threw them against the wall. Natalie's ears rang. She opened her eyes to find Marco on top of her, unmoving. "Marco." No response. She pushed at his shoulder. "Marco." His eyes opened. Pain twisted across his face. "You keep saying my name like that," he murmured, "and I may begin to believe you need me." Natalie almost cried. Instead, she gripped his coat. "I do need you." The confession changed him. The coldness he had carried all night fractured completely. He lowered his forehead to hers. Outside the broken door, snow whipped through the carriage. "I have needed you for 3 years," he said. His voice was nearly lost beneath the storm. "I hated it." Natalie's breath trembled. "That is not a very romantic confession. It is the only honest one I have." A gun clicked behind them. Owen stood in the doorway. Blood covered one side of his coat. He held Victoria's weapon. Marco shifted in front of Natalie. Owen raised the gun. Then he turned and fired through the open door at an attacker climbing aboard. The man fell. Owen looked at Natalie. "I'm sorry." The next bullet came from outside. It struck Owen in the chest. He collapsed across the doorway. Natalie caught him. His breathing was shallow. "They said no one would get hurt," he whispered. "You knew that was a lie. I wanted it not to be." Natalie pressed her hand to the wound. Owen looked toward the passengers gathered behind her. "Did we stop?" "Yes." A faint, broken smile touched his mouth. "Then you were right again." His eyes closed. Natalie bowed her head. Marco rested one hand against her back. He did not tell her Owen deserved it. He did not tell her betrayal erased grief. He simply remained beside her while she mourned someone who had failed her. The battle ended 17 minutes later. Marco's surviving guards secured the cut after reinforcements arrived from a Bellini helicopter that risked the storm. The rival gunmen were disarmed or killed. The explosives beneath the train were deactivated. At dawn, emergency crews reached Whitehaven. The storm began to weaken. Natalie stood outside the train as passengers were escorted toward rescue vehicles. The mountains emerged slowly from the darkness, vast and pale beneath the first light. Marco sat on the locomotive steps, while a medic examined his abdomen. He had refused evacuation until every passenger was accounted for. Natalie approached. The medic glanced between them. "He needs surgery." Marco looked at Natalie. "I heard him. You are going." That sounded like an order. "It is." The corner of his mouth moved. He stood carefully. For the first time, weakness showed in his body. Natalie reached for him. Marco allowed her to support part of his weight. His arms settled around her shoulders. Around them, armed guards pretended not to notice. At the helicopter, Marco stopped. "Come with me." Natalie looked back at the train. "My passengers are safe. The railway investigation will still exist tomorrow. And if I come with you?" His chaza held hers. "You will be beside me when I wake." The request was quieter than anything he had said all night. Not a command, not ownership, a need he could no longer hide. Natalie entered the helicopter. Marco woke in a private Denver hospital 12 hours later. The room had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city and enough security outside the door to protect a head of state. Natalie sat in a chair beside the bed, still wearing her damaged conductor's uniform. His eyes opened slowly. They found her immediately. You stayed. You asked. I have asked for many things. I imagine most people are too frightened to refuse. Were you? Yes. His fingers moved slightly against the blanket. Natalie placed her hand in his. Marco closed his eyes for 1 second. The relief on his face was almost painful to witness. When he opened them again, the armor had returned. Not completely. I will transfer ownership of the railway, he said. Natalie frowned. To whom? A worker. Controlled trust. You will have oversight authority. You think that fixes everything? No. Good. I also terminated all unauthorized monitoring connected to you. All? All. What about the security cameras at Blackridge? They belong to the railway. Not to you? Not after the transfer. Natalie studied him. And what will you do? Try not to purchase anything else you love. That might be wise. His thumb moved over her knuckles. You are still angry? Yes. Will that prevent you from seeing me? That depends. On what? Whether you can learn the difference between protecting someone and controlling them. Marco's expression became serious. I do not know how to love without control. The honesty silenced her. He looked toward the city. Control kept my mother alive. It kept my family alive. It kept me alive. And did it make you happy? No. Did watching me from a distance make you happy? His jaw tightened. No. Then perhaps your methods are flawed. He looked back at her. What do you recommend? Start by asking. Marco was quiet. Then he released her hand. The absence surprised her. He lay back against the pillow, every line of his face restrained. Natalie Reed, when I leave this hospital, may I see you again? She smiled despite herself. Yes. His hand closed around hers again. 3 months later, Blackridge Rail reopened the damaged eastern route. The company no longer belonged to Belmont Infrastructure. It belonged to the employees. Natalie had accepted a position as Director of Mountain Operations on one condition. She would still conduct at least 2 overnight routes each month. She refused to spend the rest of her life behind a desk. On the first ceremonial journey across the repaired pass, reporters filled the platform. Passengers gathered beneath blue and silver banners. Marco arrived without announcing himself. He wore a black overcoat and no visible weapon, though Natalie knew at least 6 guards watched from discreet positions. The crowd shifted when they recognized him. Whispers followed. Marco ignored them. He stopped in front of Natalie. She wore her conductor's uniform, tailored precisely to her full figure rather than designed to hide it. Her hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders. For several seconds, they simply looked at each other. Their relationship had not become easy. Marco still sent too many security vehicles when she traveled. Natalie still returned them. He still tried to solve problems with money. She still made him ask before interfering. They argued. They withdrew. They returned. Slowly, Marco learned that devotion did not require a cage. Slowly, Natalie learned that beneath his control lived a man who had spent his entire life preparing to lose everyone he loved. A reporter called out, "Mr. Bellini, did you really buy this railway for Miss Reed?" Marco looked at Natalie. She raised one eyebrow. He had promised not to answer questions about her without permission. The reporter repeated the question. Marco waited. Natalie nodded once. "Yes," he said. The crowd erupted. Another reporter shouted, "Was it a romantic gesture?" "No." Natalie looked at him. Marco continued calmly. "It was an act of cowardice." The platform quieted. I wanted to protect her without risking rejection. I believed distance was safer than honesty. His gaze remained on Natalie. I was wrong. The reporters went silent. Even Natalie forgot the cameras for a moment. Marco stepped closer. "I have spent my life making men kneel." A murmur moved through the crowd. He reached inside his coat. Several railway employees tensed. Marco withdrew a small velvet box. Then the most feared mafia boss in America lowered himself onto one knee in the snow. Natalie stopped breathing. The reporters surged forward. Marco did not look at them. Only her. "I will not buy your future," he said. "I will not decide it. I will not protect you by hiding the truth." He opened the box. Inside lay an antique diamond ring set in dark silver. "I can only ask to be included in it." Natalie's eyes burned. Marco's voice remained controlled, but she saw the fear beneath it. He had faced bullets with less uncertainty. "Natalie Reed, will you allow me to spend the rest of my life learning how to love you without controlling you?" She looked at the man kneeling before her, the man who had bought a railway rather than admit he cared, the man who had used his body to shield hers from bullets, the man who had frightened her, angered her, protected her, and finally trusted her enough to ask instead of command. Natalie held out her hand. Yes. The word had barely left her mouth before Marco stood. He slid the ring onto her finger. Then he touched her face with the same restraint he had shown the first night in the conductor's office. His hand paused against her cheek, waiting, asking. Natalie leaned into him. Marco kissed her while snow began to fall over Black Ridge Station. The crowd disappeared behind the sound of her heartbeat. His arms closed around her, powerful but no longer possessive, holding her as though he understood that love was not proven by how tightly one held on. It was proven by leaving enough space for the other person to stay willingly. Behind them, the midnight crest sounded its horn. The train waited beneath the mountains. Natalie drew back slightly. "I have a schedule." Marco looked toward the locomotive. "I own no part of it." "No." "Then I cannot order it delayed." "No." He glanced at her ring. "Can I travel with you?" Natalie smiled. "Do you have a ticket?" Marco Bellini, a man who had once purchased an entire railway for her, reached into his coat and produced a single passenger ticket. Natalie laughed. A real laugh, this time. The sound changed his face. The darkness remained in him. It always would. Marco was still feared, still dangerous, still capable of violence against anyone who threatened the people under his protection. But when he looked at Natalie, the danger became devotion. They boarded the train together. Hours later, as the midnight crest crossed the rebuilt bridge above Grayson Gorge, the passengers slept beneath dim amber lights. Natalie stood alone in the observation car, listening to the rails sing beneath the wheels. Marco entered without speaking. He came to stand beside her at the window. Far below, moonlight silvered the frozen river. "This is the sound?" he asked. "What sound?" "The one you told me about, the rails singing." Natalie listened. The steel hummed beneath them, steady and low, carrying the train safely through the mountains. "Yes." Marco took her hand. For a while, neither spoke. They had survived betrayal, gunfire, fire, and the terrible collapse of trust. They had crossed a mountain on broken rails. Now, for the first time, Marco was not watching Natalie from a distance. He was beside her, not as an owner, not as a protector hidden in the shadows. As the man she had chosen, Natalie rested her head against his shoulder. Marco pressed his lips to her hair. Outside, snow covered the dark peaks. Inside, the train carried them forward. And somewhere in the endless night, the most dangerous man in America finally understood that love was not a route he could purchase, command, or control. It was a journey he had to take beside her, 1 mile at a time.